Again, I'm pleased to be introducing our next speaker, Thomas Motmans from BASE, Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy. Unfortunately, Thomas could not be here with us live. He's based in Europe together with other, of course, our colleagues. So we have pre-recorded a dedicated session, especially for the Atmosphere Australia, to introduce the topic of cooling as a service to all delegates. Cooling as a service has a massive potential to disrupt the markets that are not yet fully converted to natural refrigerants and energy efficient solutions. So we're very excited to work with BASE, very happy to have Thomas with us in this way. And please submit your questions. This is very interesting and very new topic. So we would ask you to please submit your questions, and we will make sure that all the questions will be answered by Thomas, and we will provide you the answers via email. So with that, please let me again introduce Thomas Motmans from BASE, who is the Sustainable Energy Finance Specialist. And the following will be a 16 minutes video presentation from Thomas about the cooling as a service and how it has the potential to disrupt our industry.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for taking the time to listen to our experience with the innovative business model, cooling as a service. And I would also like to thank the awesome Atmosphere team who has set up this great virtual event. Before I start, let me give you some context about the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, which is the organization I work with. BASE is a Swiss not-for-profit foundation and a specialized partner of United Nations Environment, founded in 2001. We design, develop, and implement innovative business models, financing structures, and risk mitigation mechanisms to incentivize investments in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and climate change solutions. Over the past 3 years, we have increasingly focused on efficient cooling through various partnerships with the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, which is a philanthropy under ClimateWorks based in California. In 2018, we launched the Cooling as a Service initiative, which aims to increase the adoption of more efficient cooling systems through the use of a new business model. And just to clarify, we do not sell cooling technology or financing. We work as facilitators and knowledge creators. So scaling up the adoption of clean cooling is urgent, both to reduce the energy consumption required for cooling, which currently is consuming 10% of the world's electricity and is set to triple by 2050, but also to reduce the impact on climate change of refrigerants currently in use. The cooling industry is also a large business opportunity because according to the IEA, International Energy Agency, $6.9 trillion will be invested in cooling over the next 30 years, equivalent to $230 billion per year. For most technologies, the main component contributing to the life cycle costs of the equipment are electricity consumption and maintenance, as shown by this diagram. You can see that the initial investment is only a small fraction. In other words, the total cost of ownership of cooling systems is most effectively reduced by installing the most efficient system, by optimizing the preventive maintenance offered to the systems, and by applying system thinking, such as by adding components like thermal energy storage or passive cooling to reduce the load. However, market barriers and misaligned incentives result in the fact that cooling users tend to invest in technologies that require lower upfront investments, but result in higher operating costs. In fact, data from the IEA, from the Future of Cooling report, shows that customers purchase cooling systems that are much less efficient than the best available technology. Some of the key factors that we have identified are: first, customers are sensitive to purchase price, even though energy cost savings would ultimately make up for the additional upfront cost. Second, customers often lack trust in the performance of the system or whether the actual savings will be worth the investment. And third, customers prefer to invest in their core business, which typically is not cooling. Finally, spare parts and adequate maintenance is often either overlooked or not available. Cooling users normally do not have the required expertise themselves, and in traditional business models, the solution provider doesn't necessarily have the incentive to offer optimal preventive maintenance. Servitization, or moving from selling products to selling services from a transaction model to a subscription model, aims at overcoming these barriers. For cooling, we call it cooling as a service. And I mean by this a model in which the user pays per unit of cooling and does not need to invest in or operate the system. Product as a service models are in fact not new and are actually growing rapidly across many industries. To name only a few, we can think of the Xerox model, selling copies rather than copy machines, Rolls-Royce selling power by the hour rather than selling the engines for airplanes, Signify offering hours of lighting to the airport in Amsterdam Schiphol. So these are all examples. In the solar sector, power purchase agreements, PPAs, have enabled the rapid uptake of photovoltaic technology by enabling customers to purchase kilowatt hours of solar energy instead of having to invest in the solar panels and maintaining these and operating these, essentially eliminating the performance risk perceived by the customers. In the cooling sector, we're currently really at the brink of this revolution, and servitization is attracting a lot of attention across regions because it has the potential to be a true game changer for the industry, as it makes more efficient technologies competitive, cost competitive, compared to cheaper technologies, cheaper, less efficient technologies. Let me go through here. Last year, we presented Cooling as a Service to the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, a highly reputable group of institutions and investors in government, private sector, development finance, philanthropy, who endorsed Cooling as a Service as one of the most innovative, actionable, and scalable financial instruments of 2019 among more than 250 applicants. So with Cooling as a Service, the way it works is customers pay the cooling service per unit of cooling consumed, which is measured. It can be ton refrigeration hour, it can be BTUs, it can be different type. It depends really on the application. And instead of purchasing the actual asset, the technology provider then owns the cooling system, maintains it, and covers all operating costs. And this includes also electricity or water in some cases. And this really positions the solution provider as the decision maker on which technology will be used to deliver the cooling. And that decision will then be based on a long-term vision rather than the short-term upfront investment considerations. The provider then also has, of course, the incentive to offer optimal preventive maintenance for a couple of reasons. First of all, to maximize the operating efficiency, because this will reduce the cost to deliver the service. Also to reduce unplanned breakdowns and downtime, because during these times there's no income from the customer, and to avoid more expensive corrective maintenance in the future. And the model also incentivizes the design of cooling solutions for long-term use, for instance, through modular designs, because ownership stays with the provider. This is just to show very shortly the difference between Cooling as a Service and some key other models. Some of the famous models that are known are what we call EPC contracts, energy performance contracting models, which basically are offered by ESCOs, which are energy service companies, who offer shared savings or guaranteed savings contracts to the customer. And in these contracts, the payments are normally tied to the savings, while in Cooling as a Service, the payments are not tied to any saving. The payments are really tied to the actual consumption of the cooling unit, of the cooling service. So that's quite a difference, because then you do not need to go into a negotiation in which you have to define how much savings were achieved. There's a clear, transparent structure in which the price is agreed in advance per unit of consumption, which is measured. District cooling is another model that is quite similar. In fact, it is really Cooling as a Service, but we differentiate from district cooling by saying, well, district cooling needs a big investment. It's a big infrastructure. One, for example, chiller plant offering cooling or heating to different buildings, while cooling as a service can be applied to individual buildings. The model has advantages for the main stakeholders involved, which are really cooling users, suppliers, and investors. For users, the model overcomes the key barriers that were raised before, since the customer now doesn't need to make any additional investment, is also no longer exposed to the performance risk of the equipment, and can focus on its core business by fully outsourcing the cooling service. For technology suppliers, moving to cooling as a service enables to create additional value by fully deploying the potential of their technology because they're now operating it. It can also generate predictable, continuous, and additional revenue streams throughout the product life cycle. And it is a strategic response to both trade wars, which normally apply to goods rather than services, and sustainability challenges by stimulating the circular economy in which assets are actually redesigned for long-term use instead of being sold in the short term. For investors, while many investors have green financing available and are actually looking for projects to allocate these funds to, and cooling as a service is a very safe and easy to understand vehicle to generate a pipeline for investors to create green portfolios. Cooling as a service actually enables financiers to invest in assets generating cash flows, which are these chillers or these refrigeration units generating cash flows. The model includes different possible financial structures to enable to recapitalize cooling as a service providers, so for them to scale the operations up. And without going into much detail, I would like to show some possible financial structures that can enable to scale up cooling as a service. This one is called sale and leaseback, and it's a form of asset-backed finance. After a solution provider signs one or more cooling as a service contracts with customers, the assets still owned by the provider can be sold to a bank and then leased back from that bank. And applicable payment guarantees reducing the default risk to which technology providers are exposed can also be endorsed to the bank who is purchasing the assets. This is one option. The second option, among many others, is based on project financing. So in this case, a special purpose vehicle purchases the equipment and signs a contract with the customers, which is the cooling as a service contract. Then the special purpose vehicle also signs a contract with the solution provider, who will be the one really supplying, maintaining, and operating the equipment on behalf of the SPV. Together with the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program, we are leading the Cooling as a Service initiative to stimulate the market to adopt the model. The initiative includes a couple of components. First, we have been developing tools to enable the model, such as cooling as a service contracts, pricing models, and financial structures to monetize the projects. And these are available on the website. Here you can see some results to show that cooling as a service can be the most attractive scenario for customers. And these results can be found in the paper that we have developed together with the Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance that is also available online. Second, we are working with technology providers and investment funds to test the model in different regions of the world. We work on projects from different sectors, ranging from commercial and industrial air conditioning and retail refrigeration to small-scale cold storage for vaccine and agricultural supply chains. This world map, you can see where the model is currently being implemented. We're supporting providers in the Caribbean, in Mexico, in Costa Rica, Argentina, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and India to implement the model. We're also working closely with MGM Innova Group, which is an investment fund who has been implementing the model in Colombia, and with CARE, based in Singapore, who is implementing the model in Singapore, in Malaysia, as well as in India. So as you can see, we're currently not active in Australia ourselves, and this is really due to donor preferences focusing on developing in emerging markets. However, this doesn't mean that CaaS doesn't have any potential in Australia. All the opposite. We think that cooling as a service is a really promising solution for Australia. There's a large demand for cooling, strong and capable cooling solution providers, and a strong financial sector. We also know of some companies already looking into cooling as a service in Australia. Thirdly, the Cooling as a Service Alliance. So we have created partnerships with different companies which are technology providers, investors, different networks, associations, to really make cooling as a service something that is somehow accepted uniformly. So to put a definition as well on this model. So for instance, here you can see some of the more than 40 organizations, which include global cooling system manufacturers, different investment funds, local companies. And here you can see some of the other networks who are part of the alliance, who are really helping to spread the word about the model. Finally, one of our goals is also to spread the word about the model and to build capacity through events, workshops, webinars, publications. Here you can see an example of one webinar with the International Energy Agency and another one with the World Green Building Council. And here are some relevant publications about cooling as a service from The Economist and the UK government, who considered cooling as a service as one of the key solutions to tackle the issue of cooling. The World Green Building Council, Sustainable Energy for All. We have also published some case studies of cooling as a service, such as the Commercial Building Q office implemented by MGM Innova Group in Colombia, and the food packaging firm AfroPro in South Africa, implemented by Energy Partners. These are all available on the website, so there's much more information than just the two pictures. On the left, you have Q office, and on the bottom, you have AfroPro in South Africa. We have organized our first what we call matchmaking event, which took place in South Africa in March. But with the current health situation, of course, we are moving to a virtual strategy. And we're planning a global cooling as a service e-summit, which will happen on the 1st of December, which will cover in detail many of the technical aspects of the model that I mentioned before, and also will showcase some actual projects. We have launched, for instance, what we call the Cooling as a Service Incubator, which is the one supporting many of the companies that I mentioned before in these different countries that you saw on the map. And these will also be presenting their progress with cooling as a service. So to conclude, I would like to say that we see really a large potential for cooling as a service to accelerate the transition to clean cooling. And I would encourage you to really look into this business opportunity, because we see a shift to servitization in many sectors, and there's no reason why it will not happen in the cooling industry. And I can also encourage you to get involved, for instance, by joining the Cooling as a Service Alliance, by signing up for the newsletter to stay updated, and also, of course, to join us for our e-summit on the 1st of December. And with this, I'd like to thank you very much and wish you a very good continuation of the day. Thank you.